What is up, my friends? I'm back to talk about a book long awaited on this channel. We're diving back into the Dresden Files series with Book 2, Full Moon. I'll give it a little bit of a spoiler-free review first, and then we can talk about all the specifics and cogs afterwards if you've already read this book or just want to hear my thoughts. I too like watching videos about content that I have not myself consumed. It's like, I get what you're putting down, but there's a whole lot of nothing in here while I eat my lunch. Anyway, Full Moon is back in Chicago, back with our local fedora-tipping mage detective Harry Dresden as he's thrown back into the chaos of the fantastical world laying just below the surface of the city. This book was bad. Like, I had my issues with the first one, and I hear this one is the worst of the series, and I really hope that it improves from here. But this book was unfortunately a bit of a mess from a pacing perspective, and a plotting perspective, and a character perspective. Harry is investigating some full moon killings, so naturally, this is the werewolf book. I think this book has some interesting world building going on that lets us expand our understanding of this similar Earth to our own, but with fantasy stuff in it. We get to expand our bestiary with a bunch of different wolf type monsters all under the umbrella term werewolf. We get to see a bit more of the politics of the police station with pressures on Murphy coming from the higher ups for relying so heavily on Dresden. We get a bit more characterization into Johnny Marcone, crime boss of Chicago. But unfortunately, this book only misses the mark on creating an entertaining story to surround all of that world building. There's a ton of interesting things to explore here, but we really just kind of swerve all of it, and much of this isn't even used as setup for future books. A lot of the plot lines in this book are ultimately wrapped up by the end. The plot itself feels extremely fast. I went through and I mapped out the beats of this story, and it's essentially just exposition, action, repeat a few times, and now we're at the end with hints of more to come in the future for Harry Dresden in darker times. And that's not really great. I mean, I read this book incredibly fast because of this pacing, but I don't think the pacing does a lot to support a reader's enjoyment beyond that. It's also intended to be a mystery. Dresden do be a detective of some kind, but the mystery just kind of throws a bunch of overly complicated twists at you, and then it wraps all up in a rather anticlimactic poof of nothing. The only villain that I have any interest in this book is Johnny Marcone. Butcher does a great job of making this character relatable and empathetic. He's a mob boss, but you can understand the reasons behind his actions at any given time. He's doing what's best for him. He's only sticking his neck out to drive profit. He's got a soft spot for kids. I can see why he does what he does. He fits a trope, but he's compelling as a human with human drives. The rest of the villains laid out in our story are really rather flat. Motives and actions that don't make a lot of sense beyond just being the villain of this story. And that's really unfortunate for a werewolf genre book where the idea is a cursed human forced to be a beast, bringer of violence and destruction, and that tear between those two sides of them. I have two other big spoiler-free issues with this book. Number one is that it's essentially just a rerun of the last book, but somehow worse. The obsession with women's bodies and sexualization is rampant throughout this book. The womanizing problem in this book seems to extend past one of Dresden's character flaws and into the style of writing in general. And once again, we don't see pushback. If anything, from one character in particular, we see a perpetuation of bad stereotypes and a green light for Dresden to keep being the way he is, which is incredibly gross. Also, Harry has some superhuman vision to see some of those nipples harden. He can clock that at like 300 yards away with his male gaze, I swear. Overall, this book did not meet my very low bar set by the last book in this particular category. There were certainly times I felt rather gross reading through these portions. The other issue I'll bring up is a rather weird injection of political statements into the story. Things about national debt and politicians being bad. These are clear jabs at real-world politics rather than whatever is going on in fantasy Chicago. And they don't really do anything to build out this world that Butcher is creating. It just feels more like a soapbox that can often really isolate a reader. I think from a writing perspective, if you want to make a political statement, please do it. Speak what you feel needs to be spoken. I will not fault an author for speaking their piece on a particular subject, but please, I beg of you, when writing a narrative piece of fiction, make it blend into your story in a way that serves purpose. These lines I'm referencing don't really speak truth to anything that characterizes Dresden in a meaningful way, and they don't really speak to enhancing our knowledge or understanding of the world either. Weave it into the politics of this Chicago. Make it work for you. stop. Make it work for the story if it's something that you want to say. Otherwise, it's just gonna stick out and I'll make a little note of it being weird, and that's a whole 5 minutes I could have spent reading more about your werewolves. At the end of this book, I walked away having to take quite a break from Harry and his friends in spooky Chicago. I cannot in good conscience recommend this book, unfortunately, as the flaws are too large and the gross is too gross. If it weren't for a few recurring characters that I know are coming back in later books, I would honestly urge you to just skip this and move on to book 3. This book doesn't do nearly enough to advance Harry's character journey or his relationship with Murphy, and the mystery itself is rather meh. I'll give this one a big old donut. I don't like doing negative reviews. I try to find what there is in a story to praise. I do feel like there are a few things that can be praised in this story, but unfortunately, in this instance, there just isn't enough. Now, however, we can go into spoilers. We can talk about some specifics for why I feel this book was a rather large step down from the previous one. Let's first start with the interesting premise, delivered to us in a way that I thought was going to be used to build up the world in a more subtle way, rather than setting up the plot for this book and this book alone. Dresden determines full moon killings means werewolves, proving that Dresden is past the 3rd grade. He gets a rather long-winded rundown of all the different types from his skull friend, classic werewolves, lugaroos, lycanthropes, hexenwolves, and I guess a secret bonus, wolves that can turn into humans. When I initially read this setup, I figured, okay, so we'll get some red herrings, we'll go along, we'll slowly figure out, oh, it's not one of the more common types, it's actually one of the more rare types of werewolves, and we'll go from there, narrowing down our search. But we in fact just get 4 different groups of the different kinds of wolf people, and oh my god, is that way too many things for this short a story? It leads to that pacing issue that I brought up in my spoiler-free section, where it essentially goes action scene, introduction to all the werewolves of this clan, action scene, introduction to the next kind of werewolf, action scene, and then we're at the end of the book. It's never letting us just sit with the information. Maybe that's important because Harry doesn't do a lot of detectiving with the information he's given in this book either. He's very similar to the Dark Knight here, where he's just punching things till he gets answers and points to where to go next. This all culminates in the rather unlikable FBI agents turning out to be the Hexenwolves. These are the main bad guys of the story the whole time. And they're doing all of this and framing the Lugaroo to, get a mobster who they can't get on real legal terms to kill him? As I said in the spoiler-free section, these villains are so flat. When you write a story, good, strong villains are characters who are heroes of their own story. I guess killing a mafia boss who does crime can be seen as heroic, but man, there's gotta be an easier way than turning into wolves and killing whoever you want in order to get this one guy, right? This is the framing of the whole book, and so the rest of it is just completely weakened by this plot structure, and that's really unfortunate. My other major issue is, while I can empathize with Murphy having the stress of the upper management come down on her for trusting this homeless man in a jacket, she's meant to be Harry's friend. And when she arrests him, she beats him up. This feels like we're replaying the character clash that happened in book 1, but turn it up to 11. It feels like they don't even know each other at times. Does she need to arrest him? Yeah, but I would expect for her to do it here a bit more begrudgingly. I thought there was an amount of trust built up after the last book that would kind of be able to be maintained in this second book. Yeah, Harry does have reason to need to withhold information from her, but man, does she shatter any thoughts that they have like a close or any relationship really beyond he solves crimes for her and she kind of takes credit for them. There's no trust, there's no core friendship here. It really just feels like she can be seen as another antagonist in the story, and we already have so many of those. My last more nitpicky issue than anything is something that I think could have been really strong here, but it ended up being rather weak because the work to get to the reveal wasn't put in, and the after effects don't really feel like they land either. And that is this student who comes to Harry at the beginning of the book asking him to teach her how to do this kind of containment circle, and he just blows her off, and then this comes back to haunt him when she tries to do it anyway and then winds up dead. I think this is a really cool plot point, but it was about a character who we got introduced to as she's asking for the thing she needs, and then we never see her again until we see her dead body. And it felt like the lesson intended here for Dresden is he needs to let people in, he needs to be a better teacher, be more open with his magic. I think Dresden had a pretty solid reason for not teaching her how to do this. This is intended for like demons and other high-powered entities, and a new student shouldn't be doing that. But he was kind of stupid for expecting that she was just gonna drop it after he said no to her. But like seriously, I don't know what he's supposed to get from this with the way it's delivered to us. Ask more questions when someone comes to you with a crazy request? I think we'll see a similar thing done in the next book with the introduction of a character very early on and an exploration of their relationship with Dresden that is handled significantly better than this one. And it helps to push on Dresden's characterization journey moving forward. And contrasting that to this makes this plot point feel all the more hollow after the fact. Well, there we have it. From what I understand, this will be the biggest slog of the Dresden series that I will have had to have gone through. And hopefully I can return after finishing the next book a bit more positive for what I have to say. I will continue to say that I do really enjoy the aspects of urban fantasy introduced in this world in this book, and it's just the rest of it that brings it down for me. I really hope that we can see this improve in the upcoming books to match how interested I am in the fantastical occurrences surrounding the misogynistic Harry Dresden. Do you think this is the weakest book in the series? Which book do you think will be the best one to come? I want something to look forward to as I move through this series. The promise of quality is always something that'll keep me reading a series. So please, let me know down in those comments what you think the best Dresden Files book is. And while you're down there, why don't you just hit that little like button? And if you haven't yet and you found anything I had to say in this video interesting, why don't you just hit that subscribe button as well? I'm putting my takes out into the world on books and plan on continuing to do so for a long time. So hop on this journey with us. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one. And until then, stay lit.